So Detroit Become Human has always seemed like kind of a weird game to me. If it is a game, it doesn't seem to really fit in with normal action games. It doesn't really fit in with interactive cinema. It's somewhere in between the two. So I've always wanted to talk about it. I've always wanted to say my piece about it, and for various reasons, this year seemed as good a time as any.
Almost 8 years after its release, Detroit Become Human suddenly sold another 1 million copies during the winter sales of 2025. So with the world currently being on fire, what better time to look back at something from 2018? The question I want to ask today is simple. Is Detroit Become Human really a video game? Now, first of all, Detroit Become Human is amazing in a lot of ways. It still looks gorgeous after almost a decade, and it's also a bold attempt to pack a lot of strong storytelling into an interactive medium. What's more, the interactive elements undeniably add something to the overall experience. Last week I talked about the universal narrative models of Sid Field, Robert McKee, Christopher Vogler and the like, before questioning the assumption that all stories follow similar structures. As Detroit's plot is split into multiple branching paths, it's clearly an attempt to break free from traditional narratives. What's more, as the order in which the branching paths play out is reliant on player choices, it's easy to conclude that players have a major role in the telling of this particular story. What's less clear, however, is the extent to which the act of making choices feels meaningfully tied to the outcomes of the plot. As the choice-making system the player engages with ultimately boils down to picking options from a menu, it can be difficult to feel like you personally had a hand in determining one outcome over another. Does a player really have a meaningful influence over the story of Detroit Become Human? Or is interaction just trivially picking options from a list? And even if it is the latter, does that actually challenge Detroit's identity as a video game? The game is split up into vignettes with multiple outcomes. In an early scene in the game, Connor, an android, working with the Detroit police, is sent to deal with a so-called deviant, holding a child hostage in their family home. Connor must learn about the family and the deviant android before attempting to defuse the situation in a high-stakes negotiation. Now, regardless of how this scene plays out, what interests me is how it feels to play. Throughout this sequence, the player is encouraged to explore the apartment searching for clues, reconstructing events, and preparing for the negotiations ahead. This encouragement is communicated through a large glowing percentage indicator in the corner of the screen, clearly sending the message: the more you search, the more prepared you'll be. This is a great idea for gameplay. It actively promotes reflection, investigation, and careful thinking as core gameplay mechanics. But at a certain point, seemingly without warning, the game abruptly pushes the player into the negotiation, revealing that there's always been a hidden time limit. The priorities suddenly shift from consideration to speed, from reflection to reaction. The result is a severely mixed message. It seems to say that in Detroit Become Human, a player must search thoroughly and think critically, but also must hurry and make snap decisions. Now, while there's nothing wrong with that conflict in itself, the game is painfully bad at explaining itself and presents few opportunities for experimentation. This puts the player in a strange role. In contrast to most video games, Detroit's scenes don't always feel like playing a fair and dependable system. It feels more like the player is being asked to perform a role in a play by guessing their lines. It can sometimes feel like you're guessing the right lines, such as when characters do things that make sense, like if Connor manages to save the girl without being shot. At other times, we might equally easily guess the wrong line, sending the game's characters into spirals of almost mawkish violence. This leads to a problem. In Detroit Become Human, because taking any path is equally easy for the player, it's difficult to see a connection between action and outcome. Players undeniably choose the next scene that plays out, but it rarely feels like the events of those scenes are because of player actions. Comparing this to a more traditional video game like, say, Mario, where making a particularly difficult series of jumps unlocks the next area in a level, triggering the sense that this progression is the result of skill and effort, Detroit Become Human feels insubstantial. But is this really enough to say that it's not a video game?
So I'm not trying to say that I think Detroit Become Human is a bad game. I don't really have any interest in that. If you like it, that's absolutely amazing. What I'm trying to say is the level of interactivity that you can engage with in the game is more restrictive than a game like Mario. I know that there are the input command sequences, and that I know that the flashback and reconstruction sequences get more complex as the game goes on, but it's still a really small level of complexity compared to what you get in a lot of other games.
One way to approach this is through theory. There are many definitions of video games, and many of them would struggle with Detroit. One framework that's particularly useful here is Hartmut Konitz's concept of the interactive digital narrative, or IDN. Konitz isn't just interested in defining video games, he's actually interested in how digital systems disrupt traditional narratives altogether. He defines IDN as a narrative expression in various forms implemented as a multimodal computational system, experienced through a participatory process in which interactors have a non-trivial influence on progress, perspective, content, or outcome. Two clarifications he makes are crucial here. IDN is not simply adding interaction to traditional narratives. It's also not the future of novels, films, or a replacement for them. IDN is its own thing. A key phrase I want to focus on, though, is non-trivial influence. For Konitz, interaction isn't just about choice, it's about having a meaningful influence. Interactive digital narratives shouldn't just be linear stories with digital options. They should be systems where engagement itself produces narrative experience. This is why Konitz, quite reasonably, distinguishes IDN from enhanced cinema. IDN must be more than just a traditional medium with digital add-ons. Confusingly, though, he does argue that Black Mirror Bandersnatch was a good idea of an IDN, even though it's literally just a film with choices. So, sometimes I don't agree with everything he says, but that's foreshadowing. Let's get back to Detroit Become Human. In his book, Konitz actually praises Detroit as a strong example of an IDN. He argues that the game provides high agency with choices that have far-reaching consequences, something he calls global agency, transforming characters and producing multiple narrative outcomes. From this perspective, Detroit is a strong example of an IDN, clearly distinct from novels or films. To an extent, I can kind of understand that argument, but I still disagree with him. Although Detroit offers many outcomes, the player can never fully understand the consequences of their actions in the moment. Worse still, the game rarely allows experimentation or immediate feedback. If you want to see what another choice does, you might have to replay 20 minutes of content. As a result, player actions start to feel less like decision-making and more like rolling a dice on what part of a DVD they'll watch next. Players aren't striving toward an outcome. They're selecting from a menu and waiting to see what happens. Because our actions are disconnected from understanding, intention, or mastery, the different endings we can see in the game feel unrelated to our actions. The comparison becomes clearer when we compare Detroit to another example Konitz gives in the same chapter, that of Papers, Please. In Papers, Please, narrative progression is impossible without learning to balance increasingly complex systems of document verification, timing, rule exceptions, and moral compromises. As the story becomes more complex, so too do the player's actions. By the end of the game, you're doing far more demanding work, both cognitively and mechanically, than you were at the start. Konitz himself praises Papers, Please for this reason. It avoids binary choices, and instead lets players experience the logic of a totalitarian system through their actions. In Detroit, by contrast, player interaction rarely develops. The narrative escalates, but the input remains largely the same, leading to bizarre situations where robot uprisings and even genocide can happen or not happen simply as a result of choosing options from a menu. The relationship between action and consequence becomes strained, while the game continues to ask players for enormous emotional narrative commitment from extremely simple inputs. For me, that fails the non-trivial influence test, and ultimately renders Detroit a poor example of an IDN and, in my opinion, something other than a video game.
So yeah, where does that leave us then with Detroit Become Human? Is it a game? Is it an IDN? Is it something in between the two? Is Hartmut Konitz's definition of IDN applicable to video games? Is it a good definition to use, or is it too rigid? Do you think that Detroit Become Human is a video game, or do you just not care and think it's fun or good or worthwhile, regardless of what it's called? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much if you did watch the video, and see you next time.